The autumn sun filtered through the tall windows of Highgrove House as Camilla moved through the familiar rooms with practiced ease. It was one of those ordinary Tuesday afternoons that would soon become extraordinary. Charles had left early that morning for a series of engagements in London, leaving behind his favorite navy blazer draped carelessly over the back of a chair in their private sitting room. Camilla picked up the jacket, intending to hang it properly in the wardrobe. As she lifted it, she noticed how the fabric still carried his familiar scent of cologne mixed with the faint aroma of the gardens he loved so dearly. She smiled softly, running her hand along the lapel before checking the pockets out of habit. Charles had a tendency to forget things in his pockets: handkerchiefs, notes, sometimes even important documents. Her fingers found something small and metallic in the inner breast pocket. Expecting to find a cufflink or perhaps a forgotten pen, she pulled out her hand and froze. Nestled in her palm was a delicate gold earring, adorned with a small sapphire that caught the afternoon light. It was elegant, expensive, and definitely not hers. Camilla stood motionless for several moments, staring at the unfamiliar piece of jewelry. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. She knew every piece of jewelry in her collection, and this earring belonged to none of them. The sapphire was cut in a style she would never choose, and the gold setting was more ornate than her usual taste. She sank into the nearest chair, still holding the earring between her fingers. Through their years together, first as friends, then as something more complicated, and finally as husband and wife, she thought she knew Charles completely. They had weathered storms that would have destroyed weaker relationships. They had faced public scrutiny, family disapproval, and personal struggles. But this small object in her hand suddenly made her question everything. The house felt unusually quiet. Even the usual sounds of staff moving about seemed muted. Camilla turned the earring over in her hand, examining it from every angle as if it might reveal its secrets. Who did it belong to? How had it ended up in Charles's pocket? And, most troubling of all, why hadn't he mentioned it? She thought back to the past few weeks, searching for any unusual behavior or unexplained absences. Charles had been busier than usual with royal duties, but that was nothing new. There had been several evening engagements she hadn't attended due to her own commitments. State dinners, charity galas, diplomatic receptions, all events where Charles would have interacted with countless people. The rational part of her mind offered innocent explanations. Perhaps someone had dropped it, and Charles, ever the gentleman, had picked it up intending to return it. Maybe it had been handed to him by an aide dealing with lost property at an event. There were dozens of reasonable scenarios that didn't involve anything untoward. Yet the doubt, once planted, began to grow roots. Camilla remembered how the press had always painted her as the other woman, the one who had come between Charles and Diana. She had endured years of public vilification before finally being accepted. Now, holding this mysterious earring, she wondered if she was about to experience the bitter irony of her own position being threatened. She stood abruptly and walked to the window, looking out over the immaculate gardens. The earring felt heavier than its actual weight in her closed fist. She thought about calling Charles immediately, demanding an explanation. But something held her back. Perhaps it was pride, or maybe it was fear of what she might learn. Instead, she returned to the chair and placed the earring on the small side table, where it lay like an accusation. She would wait. She would observe. She would gather more information before confronting Charles. After all, she hadn't survived this long in the public eye without learning patience and discretion. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Camilla went through the motions of her scheduled activities, reviewing correspondence, making phone calls, preparing for an upcoming charity event. But her mind kept returning to the earring. She found herself studying her diary, cross-referencing Charles's recent engagements, trying to identify where and when he might have encountered the earring's owner. As evening approached, she heard the familiar sound of cars on the gravel drive. Charles had returned. Camilla quickly picked up the earring and slipped it into her own pocket. She would need to think carefully about how to approach this. Their relationship had survived so much. She wouldn't let a piece of jewelry destroy it without understanding the truth. She heard Charles's voice in the hallway, speaking with his valet. The sound that usually brought her comfort now carried an edge of uncertainty. Camilla took a deep breath, composed her features, and prepared to greet her husband as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The small earring in her pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric, a constant reminder that even in the most established relationships, surprises could still emerge. The following days unfolded with a strange new tension that only Camilla seemed to feel. Charles appeared his usual self, affectionate, distracted by his duties, complaining good-naturedly about his packed schedule. Over breakfast, he would discuss the day's engagements while scanning the morning papers. During their evening walks in the garden, he would share anecdotes from his meetings and ask about her own activities. Nothing seemed amiss, which somehow made everything feel more wrong. Camilla found herself studying him with new eyes. She noticed things she had taken for granted, the way he adjusted his cufflinks when thinking, how he smiled at private jokes, the pattern of lines around his eyes when he laughed. She searched for signs of deception, for any indication that he was hiding something significant. But Charles remained transparently himself, which only deepened her confusion. The earring stayed hidden in her jewelry box, tucked beneath a rarely worn brooch. Several times a day, Camilla would open the box and look at it, as if repeated examination might reveal new clues. She considered showing it to her sister Annabelle, who had always been her confidant, but something held her back. This felt too personal, too potentially explosive to share, even with family. Meanwhile, life continued its relentless pace. There were appearances to make, charities to support, family obligations to fulfill. Camilla performed her duties with her usual grace, smiling for photographers, making small talk at receptions, all while carrying the weight of her secret knowledge. One afternoon, while Charles was at a naval ceremony in Portsmouth, Camilla decided to do something she had never done before. She went through his study, not ransacking it, but carefully examining his appointment diary, looking through recent correspondence, checking for any unusual entries or unfamiliar names. She felt guilty with every drawer she opened, every paper she examined. This wasn't who they were. They had built their relationship on trust, on understanding, on acceptance of each other's flaws and histories. She found nothing suspicious. Every appointment was accounted for. Every letter was routine royal business or personal correspondence from familiar names. There were no mysterious phone numbers, no unexplained receipts, no evidence of deception. Yet the earring remained unexplained. That evening, as they dressed for a formal dinner, Camilla watched Charles in the mirror as he struggled with his bow tie. It was such a familiar scene. She had helped him with countless bow ties over the years. The intimacy of the moment made her heart ache. How could she suspect this man who still, after all these years, couldn't properly tie formal neckwear without assistance? "Let me," she said, moving to stand in front of him. As her fingers worked the silk into proper shape, she was acutely aware of his nearness, the warmth of his breath, the slight tremor in his hands that came with age. "Whatever would I do without you?" Charles murmured, smiling down at her. The words, meant as casual affection, struck her like a physical blow. She managed to smile back, patting the completed bow tie. "Probably go about with crooked ties, darling." During the dinner, Camilla found her attention wandering. She watched the other women present, cataloging their jewelry, wondering if any of them might be missing an earring. The sapphire had been real, she was certain, and the setting suggested it was valuable. Surely its owner would be searching for it? Lady Pemberton wore sapphire drops that caught the light beautifully, but both were accounted for. The Duchess of Gloucester's jewelry was all clearly a matched set. Even among the younger attendees, no one seemed to be asymmetrically adorned. Charles, seated across the table due to protocol, caught her eye and winked. It was an old signal between them, acknowledging the tedium of formal dinners and promising better company later. Usually, the gesture would make her smile. Tonight, it made her wonder what other signal she might have missed. After dinner, during the mingling that followed, Camilla found herself in conversation with and Charles's sister. The Princess Royal, never one for excessive sentiment, nonetheless had a sharp eye and an even sharper intuition. "You seem distracted tonight," and observed, her tone casual but her gaze penetrating. "Doi, perhaps just tired. It's been a busy week," and studied her for a moment longer. "If you ever need someone to talk to," she said quietly, "you know where to find me." Sometimes it helps to have someone outside the immediate situation. Camilla felt a flutter of panic. Didn't know something? Or was she simply being kind? Before she could formulate a response, they were interrupted by another guest, and the moment passed. Later that night, as Charles slept beside her, Camilla lay awake staring at the ceiling. The earring seemed to pulse with significance from its hiding place across the room. She thought about all the obstacles they had overcome to be together. The years of stolen moments, the public censure, the long wait to be accepted as a legitimate couple. They had fought so hard for their happiness. Could it all be undone by a single piece of jewelry? She turned to look at Charles in the dim light. Sleep had softened his features, making him look younger, more vulnerable. This was the man who had loved her for decades, who had chosen her despite everything it cost him. Could she really believe he would jeopardize what they had built? But then a treacherous voice in her mind whispered, hadn't she once been the other woman? Hadn't she been the secret that Charles kept? The thought made her feel sick. The universe had a cruel sense of irony if it was now placing her in Diana's position. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Charles's private secretary knocked on the door of Camilla's sitting room with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry to disturb you, ma'am, but His Royal Highness asked me to inform you that he needs to extend his trip to Wales by an extra day. An additional engagement has been added to the schedule." Camilla felt her heart skip. "I see. Did he say what the engagement was?" "A private meeting with local council leaders about the youth initiative, I believe. He sends his apologies and says he'll call you this evening." After the secretary left, Camilla sat very still. Charles rarely extended trips without discussing it with her first. It wasn't a requirement, of course, but it was their habit. Small alarm bells began ringing in her mind. She spent the rest of the day in an agitated state, unable to concentrate on anything. When Charles called that evening, she listened for any false notes in his voice, any hint of deception. But he sounded merely tired and frustrated with the extended schedule. "Darling, I'm so sorry about tomorrow. You know how these things go. One commitment leads to another, and suddenly the diary is impossible." "Of course," Camilla replied, proud of how normal her voice sounded. "These things happen. You're wonderful to understand. I'll make it up to you when I'm back. Perhaps we could steal away to Scotland for a few days." After they hung up, Camilla made a decision. She couldn't continue like this, suspicious and fearful. Tomorrow, she would do something she never thought she would. She would investigate her husband's whereabouts. The next day, Camilla told her staff she would be visiting a friend in Bath. Instead, she drove toward Wales, her heart pounding with every mile. She felt ridiculous, like a character in a bad detective novel. But she couldn't stop herself. She needed to know the truth, one way or another. She had memorized Charles's official schedule and knew the hotel where he was supposed to be meeting with the council leaders. She parked at a discreet distance, feeling more foolish by the minute. What was she doing? What did she expect to see? Charles emerging with a mystery woman? The whole thing suddenly seemed absurd. Just as she was about to leave, she saw Charles's car pull up to the hotel. Her breath caught as she watched him emerge, but he was alone except for his protection officers and private secretary. They entered the hotel for what was clearly a business meeting. Camilla slumped in her seat, relief and shame washing over her in equal measures. What had she become? This wasn't her. This wasn't them. The earring had turned her into someone she didn't recognize, suspicious, sneaking, fearful. She drove home in a daze, arriving well before Charles was due back. That evening, she sat in their sitting room, the earring in her hand once more. She had to end this madness. Tomorrow, she would simply ask Charles about it. Whatever the answer, it had to be better than this corrosive doubt. But tomorrow came with its own surprises. At breakfast, Charles seemed unusually animated. "Darling, I have something to tell you," he began, and Camilla's heart nearly stopped. You know how I've been worried about William and Catherine? The pressure they've been under lately? Camilla nodded, not trusting her voice. Well, I've been working on something, a surprise, really. I've been consulting with various people about setting up a new initiative to help young royals deal with public pressure. It's been quite secret because I wanted to present it to William as a complete package. He went on to explain the meetings, the consultations, the extra appointments squeezed into his schedule. Camilla listened, relief flooding through her. Of course Charles was planning something thoughtful for his son. Of course the secrecy was about a surprise, not deception. But the earring remained unexplained. As Charles talked enthusiastically about his plans, Camilla fingered the jewelry in her pocket. She opened her mouth several times to ask about it, but each time the words died on her lips. The moment never seemed right, and underneath her relief about his innocent project lay a new fear. If she revealed her suspicions now, after spying on him, after doubting him so thoroughly, what would that do to their relationship? Days turned into a week, and still Camilla carried the secret of the earring. It had become almost a talisman, a reminder of how quickly trust could erode, how easily doubt could take root. She found herself pulling back slightly, maintaining a subtle distance that Charles began to notice. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked one evening as they prepared for bed. "You seem, I don't know, distant perhaps." "Just tired," she replied, the lie coming easily now. This time of year is always demanding. Charles accepted the explanation, but she could see concern in his eyes. They had always been so attuned to each other's moods. How long before he pressed for the real reason for her withdrawal? The breaking point came in an unexpected moment. They were hosting a small dinner party for close friends, the kind of informal gathering they both enjoyed. The conversation was flowing, the atmosphere warm and relaxed. Then Margaret Thornton, an old friend from Camilla's pre-royal days, began telling a story. "The funniest thing happened at the charity auction last month," Margaret laughed. "You know how they had that jewelry collection donated by the Pemberton estate? Well, Sarah bid on these gorgeous sapphire earrings, but when she got home, she realized one was missing. Can you imagine? Paying all that money for half a pair." Camilla's blood ran cold. "What did she do?" she managed to ask. "Oh, she called the auction house, of course." They were mortified. Apparently, the earring had fallen out of the box during the viewing. They promised to search for it, but you know how these things go. It's probably been swept up by some cleaner by now. "Actually," Charles interjected, "I may be able to help with that mystery." He rose from his chair and walked to his study, returning with a small velvet pouch. "I found this on the floor at the auction preview. I've been meaning to return it, but kept forgetting to ask Michaels to handle it." He tipped the pouch, and out fell an earring. Not the sapphire earring that was still hidden in Camilla's jewelry box. This was a pearl drop, elegant and clearly valuable. "Oh, that's not Sarah's," Margaret said. "Hers were definitely sapphires. But someone will be looking for that, I'm sure." The conversation moved on, but Camilla sat frozen. Charles had found an earring at an auction. He had picked it up, intending to return it. He had put it in his pocket and forgotten about it. The exact, innocent explanation she had initially considered but dismissed, which meant Camilla excused herself quietly and went to her room. With trembling hands, she retrieved the sapphire earring from its hiding place. She looked at it with new eyes. If Charles's story about finding jewelry was true, and why wouldn't it be, then this earring had the same innocent origin. She thought about the past week, the suspicion, the spying, the distance she had created between them. All because she had jumped to the worst possible conclusion. All because she had let old insecurities and past roles poison her trust in the man she loved. When she returned to the dinner party, Charles caught her eye with a questioning look. She smiled at him, a real smile for the first time in days, and saw relief bloom across his features. He didn't know what had been wrong, but he knew something had shifted back into place. After their guests left, Camilla took Charles's hand. "Darling, I need to show you something." She led him to her sitting room and retrieved the sapphire earring. "I found this in your jacket pocket last week." Charles examined it with interest. "Oh, this must be from the auction too." I remember seeing someone drop something near the sapphire collection, but when I picked it up, there was quite a crowd, and I couldn't see who had dropped it. I meant to turn it in, but must have put it in my pocket and forgotten." He looked at her, puzzled. "But why did you keep it? We should return it." Camilla felt tears prick her eyes. I thought." She couldn't finish the sentence. Understanding dawned in Charles's eyes. "Oh, darling, you thought?" "Oh, Camilla." He pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face against his chest, overwhelmed by shame and relief. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I don't know what came over me. Finding it just triggered something, and Shoo," Charles murmured, holding her tighter. "It's all right. I understand." "How can you understand when I don't understand it myself?" Camilla pulled back to look at him. "We've been through so much together. How could I doubt you over something so trivial?" Charles led her to the sofa, still holding her hand. "Because we're human," he said simply. "Because even the strongest trust can have moments of weakness. Because our history makes us vulnerable in ways we don't always recognize." They talked for hours that night, with an honesty that cut deeper than their usual conversations. Camilla confessed to her fears, her spying, her week of doubt. Charles listened without judgment, occasionally squeezing her hand when the admissions became particularly painful. "I've never given you reason to doubt me," he said finally. "But I understand why finding that earring triggered something. We both carry scars from the past." "I feel so foolish," Camilla said, "and hypocritical. After everything we went through, how could I suspect you of doing what we once did?" Charles finished gently. "Perhaps that's exactly why you suspected it. We know it's possible because we lived it." The truth of his words hit home. They had been the secret, the scandal, the betrayal in other people's stories. Now, established and accepted, Camilla had feared becoming the betrayed rather than the betrayer. The next morning, Camilla woke with a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in over a week. Charles was already up, standing by the window in his dressing gown, watching the sunrise over the gardens. "I've been thinking," he said without turning around, "about trust and honesty and the things we don't say." Camilla sat up, pulling the covers around her. "What do you mean?" Charles turned to face her. "I mean that perhaps I've been too casual about some things. Taking for granted that you know where I am, what I'm doing, who I'm with. Not out of any desire for secrecy, but simply from habit. Royal life tends to compartmentalize everything." "Charles, you don't need to know. Let me finish." He came to sit on the edge of the bed. "When I picked up that earring, it never occurred to me to mention it to you. Just as it didn't occur to me to tell you about the dozen other small incidents that happened during official engagements. But perhaps that's something we should change. Not because I have anything to hide, but because sharing these trivial moments is part of what couples do." Camilla took his hand, "And perhaps I need to work on voicing my concerns directly instead of letting them fester. I spent a week in turmoil when a simple question would have resolved everything." They made a pact that morning, a renewal of sorts. To share more, to assume less, to voice doubts before they could take root. It felt like a new chapter in their relationship, born from a crisis that could have driven them apart, but had instead brought them closer. Later that day, Charles had his secretary contact the auction house about the found earrings. Both pieces were reunited with their grateful owners, who had indeed been searching for them. Sarah Pemberton was particularly effusive in her thanks, insisting on making a donation to one of Charles's charities as a gesture of gratitude. The incident might have ended there, a private crisis resolved, a relationship strengthened. But life in the royal spotlight rarely allowed for purely private moments. 2 weeks later, at a reception for Commonwealth ambassadors, Camilla overheard a conversation that made her freeze. "Did you hear about the Pemberton earrings?" one woman was saying to another. Apparently, Prince Charles had one in his possession for weeks. Sarah was beside herself looking for it. "How extraordinary," the other woman replied. "Though I suppose with all his duties, it's easy to forget such things." "Still," the first woman lowered her voice, "you'd think someone would have noticed. I mean, a man carrying around a woman's earring? If it were my husband, I'd have questions." Camilla moved away before she could hear more, but the damage was done. The innocent explanation, so clear to those involved, could easily be twisted by those inclined to gossip. She thought of all the times their relationship had been subjected to public scrutiny, every gesture analyzed, every word parsed for hidden meaning. At home that evening, she mentioned the overheard conversation to Charles. He sighed deeply. And so it begins again, he said wearily. No good deed, as they say. We could release a statement, Camilla suggested. Explain what happened. Charles shook his head. That would only draw more attention to it. Besides, explaining implies there's something to explain. We've learned that lesson before. He was right. They had weathered far worse storms than gossip about found earrings. But Camilla couldn't help feeling frustrated that even an act of honesty could be twisted into suspicion. Over the following days, the story seemed to gain momentum. Nothing official, nothing in the reputable press, but Camilla could sense the undercurrent of whispers at events. She held her head high, smiled graciously, and refused to acknowledge the speculation, and cornered her at a family gathering. I hear you're having earring troubles, she said bluntly. Not troubles, Camilla replied. Just gossip. Same thing in our world, and observed. How are you handling it? With grace, I hope. And studied her with those sharp eyes. You're different, more settled, somehow. This isn't bothering you the way it would have before. Camilla realized and was right. The gossip was annoying, but it didn't touch the core of her confidence the way it once might have. Her week of doubt had oddly strengthened her faith in her marriage. She had looked her worst fears in the face and found them groundless. Charles and I are solid, she said simply. The rest is just noise. And nodded approvingly. Good. Don't let them see it bother you. Heaven knows they've tried to bring you down before. As the weeks passed, the earring gossip faded, replaced by other scandals and speculations. Life returned to its normal rhythm. But for Camilla, things had fundamentally changed. The earring incident had forced her to confront insecurities she thought she had conquered. It had shown her that even the strongest relationship required tending, that trust was not a fixed state but an ongoing choice. She found herself more present in her marriage, more aware of the small moments that made up their life together. The way Charles still opened doors for her, how he remembered how she liked her tea, his habit of sharing amusing snippets from his reading. These weren't grand gestures, but they were the threads that wove their life together. One evening, as they walked through the gardens at Highgrove, Charles stopped suddenly. Camilla, he said, I want you to know something. In all our years together, through everything we've faced, you've been my constant. My North Star. I've never wavered in that, not once. I know, she replied, and she did know. The earring had taught her that knowing something in your head and feeling it in your heart could sometimes be two different things. But now, standing in the garden they both loved, she felt the truth of his words in both places. Good, Charles said, taking her hand, because I plan to go on being boringly devoted to you for whatever time we have left. Boring sounds perfect, Camilla laughed, leaning into him as they continued their walk. Later, she would think about how a small piece of jewelry had nearly derailed decades of love and trust, how easy it was to let doubt creep in, even when you thought yourself immune. But she would also remember how facing that doubt had ultimately strengthened them, forced them to acknowledge vulnerabilities they had been ignoring. The earring itself was long gone, returned to its rightful owner. But its lesson remained, that trust was not about never doubting, but about choosing faith over fear, communication over silence, love over suspicion. It was a choice that had to be made not just once, but daily in small moments and grand gestures alike. As they entered the house, Charles mentioned casually that he had found a button at today's engagement, probably from someone's coat. I gave it to Michael's to deal with, he added. Learn my lesson about putting random objects in my pockets. Camilla smiled. Very wise, darling. Very wise indeed. They settled into their evening routine, comfortable in their renewed understanding. Outside, the world continued its relentless scrutiny of their lives. Inside, they had found their peace again, stronger for having nearly lost it. The story of the earring would fade from memory, both public and private, but its impact would linger in the small changes it brought. The extra moment taken to share the day's trivial events, the questions asked instead of assumptions made, the choice to trust even when doubt whispered its poison. In the end, Camilla reflected, perhaps every relationship needed its earring moment, a test that revealed weaknesses but also provided the opportunity to address them. They had passed their test, not by avoiding the crisis, but by facing it honestly. As she prepared for bed that night, Camilla opened her jewelry box to select pieces for the next day's engagement. Everything was in its place, each piece with its own story. But now she knew that the most valuable thing wasn't in the box at all. It was the trust she and Charles had rebuilt, tested by fire, and emerged stronger. The unexpected discovery that had threatened to unravel everything had instead woven them closer together. And that, Camilla thought as she closed the box, was perhaps the most unexpected discovery of all.